Welcome to Negotiation Made Simple, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win the next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. This episode is a really important episode. It's an episode that is targeted towards people that are beginning their negotiation learning journey. People who want to be master negotiators, but are at the front end of that process and are looking to grow, but needing a safe place to start. And so this episode, I have brought one of the best teachers that I have ever learned from in the field of negotiation. Peter Robinson is the former director of the Straus Institute for Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine University's Caruso School of Law. He has trained tens of thousands of people in negotiation on 6 continents, literally across the world. And he is one of my mentors. He's somebody that has taught me so much about not just negotiation, but specifically how to teach negotiation. And in this episode, Peter is going to share some really insightful stories. He's going to give some suggestions that are really, really important, but these are also critical foundation skills on which we can begin to put together a framework to successfully manage every moment of conflict and every deal that needs to get negotiated. Let's jump into this conversation with Peter Robinson and think about some of the foundational elements of negotiation. Let's start from the ground floor. Tell us, how do you define negotiation, and how is it that people negotiate in order to get through business, but also to get through life?
Well, John, I think negotiation is a communication process to either reach a deal or resolve a dispute. As far as how we negotiate, the important thing to me is I guess many of us, I think, will relate to the golden rule: do unto others as we want them to do unto us. Well, I think that to me, the heart of negotiation is empathy, and taking the time to appreciate and to try and diagnose what is the other person's needs in this conversation. What are they trying to accomplish, and why? The Getting to Yes book talks about underlying interests and things like motives and fears and goals, and if we can just start our awareness of negotiation to say, I want to start by thinking about, where's the other person coming from in this conversation, and am I able to articulate my own needs as far as my, what am I willing to explain my concerns and promises, audiences, and when do I get an attaboy, and when do I get a what in the world did you do that for? And for me to be able to explain to the other person, as well as anticipate, what they're thinking and feeling. Let me share with you. For about 30 years, I was either the associate or the director of the Straus Institute for Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine Law School, and we would have conferences and things like that. Well, one year we did a conference in Baltimore in partnership with the University of Maryland, and we invited many of our friends from California to come be a part and to teach classes at this event, and we paid them, frankly, modestly. And one of my friends, called me the next week and says, Pete, there were a lot of people in attendance there, and it just seems to me like I should have been compensated more handsomely. And I told him, I want you to know that, Pepperdine did that event as a public service kind of project. Lots of people who were in the audience were people working for the ombuds offices at various federal agencies. And we invited them to come as our guests. So yeah, the room was busting with really interesting, qualified people. But just so you know, Pepperdine lost money on that event. It was good for our reputation, and there are lots of reasons to do it. But if you're kind of asking, how are the financial spoils being allocated here, I want to make sure that you know that we lost money, and we thought we were doing this as a sense of public service. It was very interesting because after I shared with him, our predicament, he says, you know what? Now I understand. I'm in 100% support. I think it's great. I'm glad I did it. And you know what? Call me again in the future when you have that kind of a project that you're doing, because I want to make the world a better place. And if we can work together to do that, I want to be a part of it. So, so there's an example of sharing my own, objectives and values and goals, and once he understood that, he was much more responsive to his perceptions, that, hey, Pepperdine's exploiting me here, and then he realized that Pepperdine was doing an act of goodness for the world.
Yeah, fascinating story there, because it really reflects a lot of what negotiation is about, and that is, at times, it's simply just educating people and engaging in this communication process to share information. And as you know, with a lot of problems out there, a little communication and a little understanding can go a long way in terms of helping to get those resolved. There are moments where you need something a bit more formal, maybe a bit more strategic, but I love your starting point of saying, hey, communicating for the purpose of allowing both sides to gain an understanding of what each other is trying to accomplish, or how each other is seeing the situation or approaching the situation. That is really kind of the first fundamental step in terms of what we're trying to do with this process. And what a lot of people don't know is that right there, even if you do nothing else and you never get to where you're bargaining back and forth or sharing ideas in terms of solutions, like that right there can be very, very productive in terms of kind of moving a relationship forward. Before we dig deeper into the interest, though, I want to ask you, Peter, and then I want to hear what you had to say in response to that as well. But I really want to get to, after having trained like 10,000, more than that, what am I talking 10,000? Probably 50, 60,000 over the course of your career, who knows? What are the biggest misunderstandings? What are the biggest misconceptions that people have about negotiation as they show up in your classroom to study it? What do you think they miss in terms of their understanding before they dig into it?
Well, a foundational dynamic is to realize that every negotiator has a choice. He or she can try to do shock and awe negotiation and scare the other side into complying with whatever the request is, or they can take a softer approach, and if you will, a servant leader kind of thing, saying, let me help you accomplish your goals. So notice with me this inherent tension between how aggressive a person's going to be in the conversation. And to your point, the biggest thing that I think we've seen is that most people come to study negotiation, and when we step back and look at it, up until that point, they have been negotiating unconsciously. They have a personality, and it might be a people pleaser or it might be a bully. And the fact is that they negotiate as an extension of their personality. The people pleaser will be very accommodating and soft. The bully will be very demanding and aggressive. And frankly, there might be a time and a place where either of those approaches is a brilliant strategy. But the biggest thing when you say what's the starting place is to become conscious of what your intuition is and your personality is and how it plays out as you negotiate, and to become self-aware, and then to instead of running on automatic pilot, for you to make intentional strategic decisions about how you're going to handle this conversation. I can tell you a time that I was totally unconscious. If you want to,
Sure.
You want me to throw more egg on my face?
Fire away.
All right. I had to fly from Los Angeles to New York, and I missed my plane because the parking lot was closed out in front of LAX. So I was already frustrated. And when I got there, I went to the customer service desk and I said, you guys got a problem with your parking lot situation. And they said, well, we don't really own or run that. It's not our deal. I said, okay, I understand, but it affects your customers. And again, I got zero satisfaction from this conversation. All they would say is, the Department of the airports runs the parking lot. So now I'm more frustrated. But they had a flight a couple hours later, so I went on over to that gate and sat down. And don't you know that eventually, an hour or 2 hours later, they get the call over the intercom. Okay, we're boarding this flight. So I'm one of the first people to the gate, and the gate agent looked at me, and she looked at my carry-on bag. She goes, "I think your bag's a little too big," right? And I'm already frustrated. And I said, ma'am, I fly every week, sometimes every other week, all the time, sometimes every week. I fly a lot, and I've carried this bag on every time. It fits just fine in the overhead. It's really not a problem. Trust me. And she says, well, no, I think you need to check your bag. And I said, you understand? I mean, this bag has not been checked, for hundreds of flights. And she says, well, it just looks big to me. And I said, where is that little container? Because sometimes they have a little box. If your bag fits in that box, you can carry it on. She goes, yeah, we took those out. I said, okay. So I said, okay, so I'll tell you what, I'll do a gate check, which is when you walk down to the end of the runway and they put a tag on your, and they take your suitcase there. And the truth is, I told her I'd do a gate check, but I intended to walk down to the end of the runway. Once I got out of eyesight from her, I was going to rip that tag off and go in and just put it up above my seat. But she said, no, we're not doing gate checks anymore. I go, what? She goes, you have to go back to the check-in area at the airport and check your bag. I said, are you kidding me? She says, no, absolutely not. So I walked probably 300 yards back to the front of the airport, and I waited. Now I'm talking to a person there to check my bag. And I said, does that bag look too big for a carry-on for you? She goes, no. I said, well, the gate agent wouldn't take it, and she sent me back here. I said, could you call her? And she goes, well, if the gate agent sent you here, let's just check the bag. Okay, fine. We'll check. So they checked the bag. Now I get to New York City. It's about 11, maybe 11:30 at night. I spent all the way from LA to Denver writing my letter to United Airlines because I got the name of the gate agent who I thought was out of control. And now I'm waiting for my bag to come out. And somehow they figured out for my bag to be the last one off of the airplane. So now I get my bag and I'm walking out, and they have a United office there in the baggage agency. Before my bag came out, I went over there and I asked the lady, I said, would you look at my bag, and could I put your name in my letter that you looked at the bag and measured it, and that it didn't meet the requirements for an overhead bag? And she said, sir, we don't really do that. I said, okay, fine. So then I went back out there. I waited. I got my bag. Now I walk right by that office again. She gets off her stool. She comes around a counter and she gets in the doorway. She goes, is that the bag? I go, yeah. And then she asked me a question that I hadn't thought of in the 6 hours since I had this experience. I go, yeah, this is the bag, right? And then she said, what did you do to piss off the gate agent, right? And for the first time in 6 hours, I thought, yeah, you know what? What did I do to cause her to say, I've had enough business, haughty business travelers. I'm just going to use my power on this guy today. So, anyways, sometimes we're oblivious.
Well, that's where, that's so powerful, because that reflects kind of what we'll talk about here in a little bit, I hope, and that is kind of the human element of negotiation. And even though it may be very transactional in terms of what you're talking about, at the end of the day, it's always humans negotiating with each other. Maybe we'll have a day where AI does this for us. I don't know. We can talk about that. But at least today, And historically, it's been two humans or teams of humans that are trying to put deals together. And that human element can't get divorced from the fact of that's how people make decisions. It's how you get people to yes, to use that language. That is just a fundamental part of it. And so your story is so powerful because it reflects that idea of like, wow, it's amazing how people get more rigid if they just don't like you or if you've done something to offend them. All of a sudden, they become much more rigid in terms of how flexible they're willing to be or not willing to be in order to make a deal happen. So let's start before the negotiation ever begins, Peter. What should people do to get ready for a negotiation?
Oh boy. Well, as much intel as you can gather about whoever you're negotiating with. If you've never negotiated with them before, hopefully someone from your office has, or someone else in the industry that you are acquainted with. And you could call and say, geez, what's it like to try to put together a deal with Peter Robinson? And they can tell you, oh, he's easy to work with, or he's really very difficult, and you need to really kind of watch very carefully because he looks to take advantage when he can. So as much intel as you can get about whoever you're going to be talking to is foundational. And to build on the point that you just made, for you to be thoughtful about what can I do to make myself likable? How can I endear myself to these folks to where they will want to do business with me and they will be more open to trusting me. And whatever you can do to reinforce and build, who you are, who you want, how you want to be perceived, in order for this conversation to go well, is two sides of the same coin. Who are they and who am I?
So I want to walk through a little bit of process. You kind of kicked off this conversation already, and I want to go a little deeper into it because I think it's really, really important. You were talking a bit about what we kind of in the negotiation field call interest and positions, and this whole idea of understanding what people really want or what they're really trying to achieve and things like that. Help us understand the difference between those two things and why spending time to understand those two things is so important in terms of being able to put together a good deal.
Yeah. I think often people come to a conversation and they have synthesized a lot of complex feelings and needs that they have, and they've come down to the answer. They've boiled it down to a conclusion, and they come to the meeting and say, okay, this is what we need you people to do. And if you want to, then that would be their position, their demand, that they get a raise or a corner office or a company car or whatever it is that they're asking of you. And now suddenly we can take their demand and then if you want to, we can make an alternative proposal to say, I can't give you a $50,000 bonus, just give you a raise, but I could give you a one-time bonus for $10,000. And here now suddenly we're going back and forth about, but both of us are the level of conversation is about the punchline, the conclusion, as compared to deconstructing the thought process. And if we can deconstruct the thought process, why is this person, making this request, this demand, and if we can understand what their perspective is on that, and again, this takes us back to that empathy, and for you to realize, they were satisfied with their salary until they realized that a coworker was making more than them. And now suddenly they were hired at different times. I'll tell you, at Pepperdine, we had people who had been hired 10 years ago and got their annual raises. But if we hired someone today, they ended up coming in at a higher level. And if that information becomes public, people people compare, and it doesn't feel fair. And now suddenly you're trying to find a way to make it more fair, more equal. And they're going to come in and say, I want a raise. And you're just like, okay, I want you to know that, the bureaucracy I work for, I just can't willy-nilly hand out raises. But I do have some discretion in some other areas. And let me ask, every year we go to a convention in New York City. Would you like to be the person who represents us at that convention? We also go to another convention in Chicago. If you like the idea of conventions, I get to pick who in the office is going to go to the convention. And I know it's not cash in your wallet, but it is. It is a fringe benefit. Would that be? And now, so notice. Once I got to the underlying cause, now we can look for other creative ways to meet that cause. To where if the underlying cause is comparison and a feeling that it's not equal, not fair, it's kind of like, well, let me see what I can do I'm not going to make it fair the way you wanted me to, but maybe there's other ways that I can try to make it fair.
And so as I'm hearing you, these positions are things that are more kind of concrete. They're what people are able to articulate in terms of what they want, but that isn't always what's really going on. Sometimes there are other things going on that it's harder for them to voice, or it's harder for them to describe, or maybe it's not in their interest, or they're for some reason concerned about being that open or being that vulnerable, but there's really something else going on. And the key from a negotiation standpoint is you want to create an environment to where you can get that out on the table. So very practically for people, if you want to try to discover interest, like what do people need to do?
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, and here we're back to that, trust building, that relationship building, for them to have a sense that you are genuinely concerned about their well-being, and that you're trying to find a solution that meets their needs, and that if they will share information with you, you will not use it to hurt them. You'll use it to help them. So the idea of by the way, and you touched on something, John, that I think is very, very important, because there's sometimes when we're talking about these intangible dimensions, people's feelings got hurt, or this sense of jealousy or comparison, sometimes those things, the person who's feeling them doesn't like having those feelings, and that they are very aware of the fact that they're being, for lack of a better word, petty. And they'll never admit to having those kinds of feelings that are generally thought of in a negative context. So even if I build the most possible trust and the most rapport, and people know that I will work for their well-being, it's still at times important for me to hypothesize, and I can't even confirm it externally. I can't say, well, isn't this really a matter of jealousy? Because everyone's going to deny that. No one wants to admit, yes, I'm jealous of my office mate. But if I'm trying to test that hypothesis that this is about comparison and jealousy, it'd be nice if we could have such a transparent conversation that they would say, yeah, when I found out that how much he got hired at, I really felt angry that, how did I fall behind? And I'm trying to catch up here. Great. But they may not be willing to admit that. But when they come in and say, you know what, I do a lot for this organization, and I want a significant raise, right? And that the bureaucracy you work for, like a university, doesn't give me the ability to do that. And now suddenly, for you to say, you don't need to say, well, is this about comparing you to the new hire? Is that what the problem is? Because I'm asking them to admit something that some people will never admit. So therefore, just come up with proposals that would satisfy those feelings, if those are the actual feelings. and it's better to try and confirm, get the overt confirmation of what the feelings and the values are behind the demand. But I've been in some situations where I just felt like it was embarrassing for the other person to admit what was really going on in their heart. And therefore, I needed to hypothesize and then come up with solutions that would attend to that. And if I threw out that proposal and their eyes got, I said, oh gosh, that would be great, right? Now suddenly I know, okay, I think I was on the right path in my hypothesis of what their feelings were that they don't want to admit to me. They may not even want to admit to themselves. But that's what's driving this conversation.
So it sounds like, what you're saying is you've got to ask a lot of questions in order to really understand and appreciate some of these very personal things that might be going on inside of somebody else.
And, St. Francis of Assisi said, seek first to understand before to be understood. Most of us go into negotiations and we want to make sure people know us and our needs and what we want out of the situation. And there may be a lot of wisdom just to sit back and say, I'd really like, yes, we do have an agenda, but I wouldn't be taking the time to meet with you if there weren't certain deliverables that I'm trying to take back to my organization. But before we get into my needs, I really want to understand where you and your organization are coming from right now. And I think people love to talk about themselves and are honored that you're giving them the mic first.
So at the very outset, you mentioned when talking about what negotiation is, you mentioned this idea of putting a deal together or solving a problem. I want to talk about solving a problem in just a second and spend a good chunk of our remaining time there. But real quick, for people that are trying to put deals together, like what's the single biggest piece of advice you have for them in terms of how to claim value and how to get a great deal?
Okay. Well, and again, this whole idea of the idea of what are the expectations, and you're walking into the conversation with certain expectations, and they are also, and to influence people's expectations makes all the difference in the world. So to give them a point of reference that would make a moderate solution look like a win. And to let them know, I want you to know that some of the people who we have this conversation with, the solution that we're offering is, down here in this range, this kind of a number. And their eyes are going to get big and saying, oh my gosh, we were expecting much more, you guys to be much more generous than that. And now suddenly, you are going to move to more generous numbers. But you got them comparing wherever we end up to that low ball number or high ball number, depending on which side of the conversation you're on. So, and notice with me, I didn't even say, we'd like to offer you $1,000 for your car. I didn't even say that. I said, I want you to know, we've bought cars like this from other people for $1,000. And they go, are you kidding me? I'm shocked. Who would sell that? Say, well, people are people. Some people did. And now they're in a situation to where, when you ultimately get to a place with $6,000 or $7,000 for that car, they're thinking, well, it's a lot better than the $1,000 that was the first number on the table. And by the way, if we're in this is very manipulative. They call it managing expectations. But it's manipulative. And there is, the tragedy is that it's so effective that they've done all kinds of different, psychological tests about this, and people are very influenceable. So as you're saying, gosh, I'm going into this. How do I get a good deal? Now the trick is to float a number that will become the number they compare the ultimate outcome to, and they're going to feel good about the ultimate outcome compared to this original number you're floating. but you want to make sure you do it without being offensive, and you do it by very soft language. You don't want to say, this is my last best final, because later on you're going to have to go up, and now you've lost credibility. But if you can find a way to say, I talked to my brother and he bought a car like this for $1,000. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, well, what we don't know is that it was the same model car, but it was 10 years older than the car we're talking about. It was anyhow, long and short is to make the first proposal and to make it, and again, there's also wisdom here, because if you make your first proposal so extreme, it doesn't advance the conversation. It doesn't influence them. You try to influence them as compared to make them frustrated or angry or frankly despair and just give up, saying, you know what, forget it. I don't think we're going to do business with these people. So there's if you're too far out, you're insulting. If you're too far in, you didn't give yourself a chance to get the best possible deal. And there's this magic middle part that I like to call the just barely credible part. It's not credible because then you're being too reasonable. It's just barely credible. Giving your side of the conversation every benefit of the doubt in the equation, and say, well, if we assume this, we assume that, we assume this, then it seems like it seems like $1,000 is about the right number, and
there you go.
You know that you gave yourself the benefit of the doubt and all those assumptions, and that you're going to move up, but you found a way to condition the person on the other side of the conversation to be receptive at a moderate number, or frankly, a number that's a good deal for you.
So just yesterday, I'm coaching a client, and we're on the phone. And he's describing for me the situation that he's in, that he's looking for some help. And essentially what happened is he went into business with a partner, and they started this business. They grew this business over the last 7 or 8 years. The business has been very successful. But when this guy looks back, he's like, I've contributed a lot more to the business than my partner has. I manage about 3/4 of the clients. I'm responsible for pretty much all of the growth. My partner's kind of managing 1/4 of the clients, not generating any growth. And yet here we are splitting this whole thing 50-50 every year. We're talking about selling it. He's expecting, 50% of the proceeds from the sale. And I'm just kind of feeling like this isn't quite 50-50 anymore, given what's happened over the last 7 or 8 years. And so here's a moment where he is needing to manage expectations. And he says, every time I approach my partner to talk about it, my partner just avoids it, doesn't want to have the conversation. And he's like, well, what do I do? And I said, well, of course your partner doesn't want to have a conversation. Your partner's been riding the wave for the last 7 or 8 years. And your partner's like, the status quo is great for me. Like, you keep building this thing and I'll keep, checking on my bank accounts to make sure they're growing thanks to you. And so one of the things that we had to talk about that was kind of a hard discussion was to say, you've got to put an alternative on the table that isn't attractive to your partner in order to motivate your partner to actually get real and have a conversation with you. And so he said, well, if my partner's not willing to listen, we're just going to dissolve this thing and I'm going to take all these clients and go on my own. We're not going to sell it. Because I don't want to sell it and give it all away. I just want to take these clients and then I'll go sell it on my own. And so it's like, well, you got to put that on the table then. And if you put that on the table, now all of a sudden your partner goes, well, hold on, don't leave me with just 25% of the clients. And, the fact that I'd have to go do a lot of work to grow that now becomes a alternative that is not as good, which then makes what he's willing to offer his partner, which frankly is pretty generous compared to what that would look like for his partner. That makes that look really, really good. And so there is kind of a carrot and a stick moment that you sometimes do have to create for people in order to motivate them the right way to make the decision that you hope that they ultimately make.
And John, to me, as I hear that story, and I've mediated a lot of partnership dissolutions, and some of them follow that script pretty closely. And to me, it comes back to a potential other conversation about expectations. What were your expectations when you entered this partnership? Did you think that one of you would be a rainmaker and the other person would be the person back in the office, minding the shop? Or did you think that both of you were responsible for business development? And to let the two of them talk to each other, I thought that you were going to be developing business also. And for the other person to say, I'm an introvert. I thought the assumption was you're going to be the rainmaker and I'm going to go back and make sure that the work product gets out on time and be the operations manager. And for them to have a more transparent conversation about, okay, this is what we thought, 8 years ago, and we were on different pages. As we talk about going forward, I'll tell you right now, and again, I've literally been in meetings where one partner says, right now, you're bringing home $1 million a year as a 50% partner. I can hire an operations manager for $100,000 a year. If you want to be an operations manager and that's all that you're willing to make a commitment to, then there's it's not partnership contribution, and the ability to understand why everyone's coming from where they're coming from might help them understand as far as, okay, I'm proposing, since I built 3/4 of the business, that I think I should take more than, and he's going to say, hey, but I've been doing the operations manager for 3/4 of the bit for the whole business, and so partnerships are funny, but the opportunity. Conflict, I think, is created by unmet expectations. And whether it's a marriage, employer-employee, partnership, vendor, both people enter into a relationship, into a contract with a certain expectation. And if we think about the negotiation and step back and say, what were my expectations? What were their expectations? How did we miss each other? And what can we do about it now? I think and I've had when I would be negotiating situations at Pepperdine, I had people tell me, I say, well, I want you to know, here's what we could do, such and such, that would have some advantage for you, but here's the disadvantage for you. And if we go down this path, I want to make sure that you make a knowing understanding of the risks that you're taking if you like that package. And I've had a number of other professors tell me, it's very interesting because you always make sure that I know, the risk, the downside of the proposal, and that you want to make sure I don't overlook that. I said, yeah, I don't want you to feel like I bamboozled you. There it is. If you say that's, again, the case study on this is Scottie Pippen. One of the most underplayed great basketball players. He entered into a contract early in his career that was a lot of money in his world, but when he saw how much other players were making 3 or 4 years later, and he realized that he was being more productive than those players, he was very frustrated and he wanted to renegotiate, and the owner of the Bulls would not renegotiate. I told him at the time that he entered that contract, there's a long year contract and it seems like a lot of money, but you may be selling yourself short, and he said, and what he said, in my understanding, is that my family is in such a situation that I needed the money now. And I took a deal. I could have been more coy and gotten more in the long run, but I took the money now. But it also created some bitterness and resentment. So.
Mm-hmm. So you raised that word that I think is really important. I want to spend a good chunk of our remaining time talking about, and that's the word conflict. And I think that's where a lot of people find themselves in negotiation. Some folks, they don't do deals, and so that's not their context. But all of us have conflict in our life, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, regardless of what role we're in or what we do, or the reality is that conflict is a part of life. And negotiation is an outstanding tool to use. In fact, it's probably the most healthy tool to use in terms of working through conflict. And so talk a little bit, Peter, about, your experience and how you coach people to use negotiation to, in a very healthy and productive way, move through a moment of conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. You might get tired of hearing me say this, but I think the foundation to a lot of things is empathy, and just understanding the other people, where they're coming from, and what their expectations were, and what mine were. Sometimes I'm not aware of my own expectations until I get into a conflict, and I say, you know what, I thought they would do such and such, and didn't realize that they were going to do the other. So. The psychologists have a phrase for it, to where I forget what they call it, to where I look at my own faults and I minimize those. I look at other people's faults and maximize those. Mm-hmm. It's a bias, so some type of bias. So the fact is I'll give you this. We have an understanding in my marriage that whenever Vicky wants to tell me something negative about me, if it's after 8 o'clock at night, I'm tired, I am done, and I do not want to think about it. So we've agreed that Vic, that's an interesting proposal. I'll tell you right now, my first reaction is to be defensive. And to say, you know what, that's not a fair characterization, and it's partly your fault, and I want to attack her back, but the fact, and I'm very good, I have good defense mechanisms, but the fact is that we've agreed that, you know what, let me think about that. Let me get a good night's sleep, and I'll think about it, and we'll talk about it tomorrow morning. I fall asleep on the couch watching TV at 9 o'clock. Now again, 7 hours after 9 o'clock is 4 o'clock in the morning. So I wake up at 4 o'clock most days, and I will go for a walk, and I do my thinking and praying on my walk. I'll have a quiet time. I read some devotional literature, and by the time she gets up at 7:30, you know what? I am much more willing to humble myself and say, Vic, I understand your frustration. I accept your criticism, and I commit to trying to work on that. And she's satisfied with that. So the idea of being
so I got to ask the question. So do you get to sleep in the bed the next night, or no? Do you still have to sleep on the couch?
No, I sleep in the bed every night. And the thing that's funny is that whenever there's something going on, either between her and me or something in the family or what have you, right? I'm exhausted at 9 o'clock. So she wakes me up at 10 o'clock and says, let's go to bed. So I go up to bed. I fall right back to sleep in 1 minute. And I sleep like a baby because I'm tired. And there are many nights to where, I'll wake up in the morning and say, how'd you sleep? She goes, I couldn't sleep at all, with whatever drama's going on, either between her and me or one of the kids or something, right? She goes, I couldn't sleep at all. And I go, oh man, I slept great. She goes, yeah, I know. I was watching you all night. So it's a gift.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
But John, here's the thing. An apology goes a long way in conflict. And if you will self-reflect, and be willing to own that which you honestly can agree was your contribution. I think the 12-step program calls it cleaning your side of the street. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if you think about it and say, you know what, I could have handled that better. I shouldn't have used that tone. However you want to critique yourself, and then be able to name that to whoever you're in conflict with and say, I know that I contributed to this by doing such and such. And I want you to know, I really regret that. I wish I hadn't done that. I will do my best to improve in that area. And here's another one of these things about psychology. Instead of trying to minimize my deficits, maximize them. Mm. And let me give you this story. I don't know I think we're almost done. Let me end on this. Okay. Years ago, we went to Hawaii, took the kids, and we all went, the whole family went ziplining, right? It cost $1,000. It was a lot of fun. We all had a great time. No bad feelings about it, right? Well, 3 weeks later, I get home to Los Angeles and I get my credit card bill, and the ziplining people charged me $1,000 twice, right? So I call them up and say, hey, we came and did your ziplining thing. There were 7 of us. It cost $1,000, and it was a lot of fun. They go, well, good. Thank you for, people don't usually call just to tell us that. They go, well, there's more, because you guys ran the credit card twice. And the woman on the phone, she goes, well, hold on, let me check. And she comes back in 2 or 3 minutes and she goes, oh my gosh, you're right. I am so sorry. This is embarrassing. This is unprofessional. This is no way to run a business. And I go, well, yeah, I wasn't asking you to die on this hill. I just want you to assure me that you'll reverse one of those charges. She goes, oh, Mr. Robinson, we'll reverse that charge. Absolutely. But I cannot tell you enough how embarrassed I am. This is not the company we are, and going on and on. And I end up by the end of the conversation comforting her, saying, listen, you don't have to be that hard on yourself. It's okay. You guys made a mistake, and if you'll fix it, I'm happy. So the idea, sometimes in our defense mechanisms, we try to minimize the mistakes that we've made. And if, in fact, we will be honest with ourselves and others and say, I made a mistake here, and I feel terrible about it. And if we will not let ourselves off easy, if we will tell the other person that you're punishing yourself, I don't know about you, but if someone disrespects me in some way, there's a voice in my head that says, you know what, that person needs to be taught not to treat me that way. And I start to get my dander up and I get ready for a fight. But if someone disrespects me, and then they realize it, and then they apologize, and they say, I feel terrible about this. Inside me, it's kind of like, okay, you know what? They made a mistake. They disrespected me in some way, but I don't need to teach them a lesson because they've taught themselves a lesson. They've already they're punishing themselves for the mistake. So now I can give grace and say, you're right. You made a mistake. I appreciate the fact that you admitted it. And I want you to know we're fine. It's as long as because one of the things the apology does, it assures people of shared values. And now we have shared values about that.
Powerful lesson there, and one that's counterintuitive. The idea of expressing your weakness and your vulnerability, or the fact that you screwed something up, seemingly is a moment of weakness, but it's actually an expression of strength. It's an expression of confidence and character. And a lot of people don't see that, and as a result of that, they don't do that, and it will perpetuate conflict for sure. So last question before we wrap up, because we are out of time, but I'm curious as to something that you learned early on in your negotiation career that you then later discovered wasn't actually true. What was something that you changed your mind about, or something that you realized, wow, this is a lesson that I thought was true, but my experience has definitely taught me otherwise?
You want to hear about the low moment of my legal career with the federal government, John?
That's fine.
All right. So my first job as a lawyer was with the federal government. I worked for the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation.
Okay.
The FDIC insures banks. We insured certain kinds of pension benefits. And here I am, a young attorney, and I get assigned to a case about about a pension plan that the trustees had stolen the money in the pension plan. And when that happened, our agency comes in and takes over the pension plan to make sure the hourly workers still get their pension. That's the whole idea behind this part of ERISA. But then the agency looks for, can we recoup some of the money that we're spending on these things? And sure enough, we're suing the trustees now, and the trustees have an insurance company for omissions and errors. So here we are, and I get assigned to this case, right? They sent me down to Miami, where this pension plan was located, and I'm investigating. And I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I actually accidentally did one thing right. And I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office because the trustees were already in federal prison. Their behavior was so egregious, they were in prison for thievery. And now I'm trying to get the insurance company to pay us money so that we can refund this pension plan instead of the government paying for it. So long and short is the U.S. Attorney's Office confirms my credentials. They actually called Washington 3 times. I evidently looked way too young, and they just couldn't believe that I was really with the government. But once they were convinced that I was with the U.S. government and they were with the U.S. government, they led me back into their office, and they led me into a conference room, and along the wall were 26 boxes. You know those Xerox boxes that they used to deliver paper in? Yeah. And they had 26 boxes, and it had names on the outside and different descriptions, and these were all the documents they used in the criminal trial to put these people in jail. And he goes, okay, the appeals are over. We're all done with this. This is just taking up space. It's your case on a silver platter. It is maybe hundreds, if not thousands, of work hours. And you're with the U.S. government. I'm with the U.S. government. Do you want these boxes? I said, absolutely. So we made arrangements and shipped those boxes up to D.C. I got back to the D.C. a couple days later, and I made the mistake of my career. I went to lunch. And while I was gone, the box delivery organization showed up at the office with these boxes. I think it was 36 boxes. And the receptionist doesn't know what to do with these things. She looks on the outside of the boxes, and she looks at some of the names of the defendants, and she looks on a roster of active cases. She goes, some of those names that's Robinson's case. So sure enough, she tells them to put the boxes in my office. Well, the government gives you an adequate office when you're a young attorney, but if you take that office and add 36 Xerox boxes, I could barely open the door. And I sat at my desk there, and I thought, this is terrible. How did I get myself into this situation? So I ended up walking down the hall, and I went to the director of litigation for the agency. He reported to the deputy general counsel, who reported to the general counsel. So I went two or three layers above who I usually reported to. And I walked in his office, and I said, we have a problem. He goes, what's that? I goes, well, I went down to Miami, and they mailed we got these boxes shipped up here. He goes, yeah, I know. And I go, well, they're in my office. He goes, yeah, I know. And he kind of started grinning, like everyone in the office is kind of like we're hazing the new guy. He can barely get into his office. So anyways, I go, well, to me, I think that we ought to start serious settlement negotiations early in this case. He goes, really? And he leaned back and he said, Peter, why shouldn't you have to do the hard work of lawyering that we all do? You need to go in and look at those boxes and figure out, the documents and get ready to in case this case goes to trial, right? And I looked back at him and I said, well, you know what? This case has already been to trial. In a criminal trial, which has a standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We just have a civil case. We just need a preponderance. There's no question as to what the facts and the law here. These guys are dirty. And why are we going to waste my time looking through all these boxes? And he says, all right, you got a point. He picked up the phone and he called somewhere else in the agency. How much have we spent on the Teamsters plan down in Florida? And they gave him a number. And he hung up the phone and he goes, all right, Peter, get them to write you a check for $500,000, and you can send all those boxes to long-term storage, right? I almost sprinted back to my office because while I was down in South Florida, I met opposing counsel, and I called him up, and I said, hey, it's me. And he says, I'm surprised to hear from you so soon. I said, I'll let you know, I just left a meeting with the director of litigation for the agency, and I have permission to discuss, to initiate serious settlement negotiations early in this case. And he goes, well, that's unusual. How come? I gave him the same pitch I gave the director of litigation. So you guys have already been to a criminal trial. There's no question here. Let's stop pretending like we have to take depositions and everything. Let's just get this done. And he goes, well, that makes an awful lot of sense, Peter, for a government attorney. And I said, well, I'm new. I don't know what, how the rest of them think, but it makes sense to me. And he said, okay. And then he asked me the magic question. All right, Robinson, what do you need? Now, if I was a competent negotiator, what number should I answer? $1 million?
Yeah, something more than 500
$2 million?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, something higher than my bottom line, right? I should build a dance floor because there's a ritual to where we go back and forth and a series of compromises. But I had not been initiated into the world of negotiation. So I told him $500,000. How did I spend my 2 years with the government? I flew down to Miami probably 10 times. I took depositions. I did all kinds of things. The case couldn't settle. Whose fault was it that I got that case so messed up? And I think many of your listeners will relate to this. It's your mother's fault, right? Because my mother and my dad raised me to tell the truth and to be honest and to have integrity. Is that good advice? That's great advice. It has served me very well throughout my career, except there's a moment when you're expected to negotiate and you're expected to understand the ritual, the tradition about how certain transactions are conducted, whether you're buying and selling a house, buying and selling a car, or buying and selling a lawsuit. And that I was unaware of the fact that I was on a car lot in that conversation. And I told the truth. After I said $500,000, what did opposing counsel do? He called his client and said, well, the government's demanding $500,000. I suggest we come back at something in the twos. We'll end up in the high threes, low fours. He and I would go out to lunch during the course of the 2 years when I'm down there taking depositions. And he would say, Peter, you remember that conversation? I said, yeah. And he said, you said 500, we've made an offer. It's your move in the ritual, right? And I had no place to move. All I could do was really, 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 really. So for those of you who were raised to tell the truth, and now you find yourself in some context to where they expect to dance back and forth, for you to recognize that and make sure that you handle your part of the conversation so that you can. That's my lesson from early in my negotiation career.
Well, that's a great story, Peter, and thank you for sharing it with us. That's also one of those lessons in the world of hard knocks that you'll never forget, never make that mistake again, and people will benefit from it in terms of knowing that in many cases you got to ask for more. Otherwise, you can get yourself stuck in a hurry. So, well, Peter, this has been great fun. Thank you for your really important insights to help those of us that are just beginning our journey in terms of thinking about some of the fundamental truths and some of the starting points in terms of negotiation and becoming a master negotiator. I would encourage people to buy the book, Negotiation Made Simple. This book was written for you. It was written for the purpose of giving you a very easy framework that you can use to then go out and do what you want to do in business and in life. And so, Peter, thanks a lot for your time and look forward to seeing you soon.
Always good. Thank you, John. And thank you to your listeners for taking the time to focus and commit yourself to improvement. So God bless you and good luck.
For those of you just beginning your journey and learning how to become a master negotiator, or maybe you're already reaching that level of mastering negotiation, this episode has something for you. The foundational ideas that Peter Robinson gave us, I think, are really valuable in terms of building our framework for how we manage negotiation. But within that, he shared some really powerful insights. I love this idea about empathy in negotiation. It was one of the chapters of my book, Negotiation Made Simple. It's not a concept that many people associate together, this idea of empathy in negotiation. And I love how Peter kept going back to it in terms of the importance of understanding the other side, understanding what they're looking for, how to then strategically accommodate that in a way that also accommodates what we're looking for, and how that leads to the best deals, how that leads to the best solutions to problems out there. And so Peter Robinson has challenged us to become more empathetic. He's challenged us to think about and understand what the other side is looking for. And in doing that, he has made us more powerful negotiators if we can execute on what he has told us to do. All the best with your negotiation adventures. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Negotiation Made Simple.